الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Assalamu alaikum. After the sunnah, there will be a talk. Staza Yasmin mojahed is over here, and she'll be talking about the secret garden of planting seeds to healthy parenting. So I would recommend folks please make the time and be here. The talk will be from now until Isha.
Yes. At the back. So I was waiting until later, but I can.
Please note that there will be babysitting also provided at the back in the school area. So for kids between the age of 3 to 7, we would recommend that they go to the babysitting area so there is at least amount of disturbance during the talk.
And don't call her Sophia. Don't call her Sophia.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers. After you're done with Sunnah, it would be great if you guys could sit over there and let someone share it, inshallah.
Security.
very important announcement. There is babysitting, so if you could please, inshallah, take your children to the babysitting. It'll just be through these doors.
So
not officially going to be, but I'll have additional I just need
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So today, we're very lucky to have Sister Yasmin Mojahed here with us tonight. The topic for today is the sacred garden, planting seeds through healthy parenting. It's an extremely relevant and important topic, especially for those of us raising children in America. There will be, I'm sure, many nuggets of wisdom that Ustaz Yasmin can share with us that we can take away today and apply to our lives. So we will have a talk. It will be followed by a Q&A session. And after that, we will also have Ustaz Yasmin with her books, and she'll be able to sign books for you as well. So depending on how long the talk goes, that may happen before or after Isha, so we'll see how that goes. As you can see, there are also some refreshments to the table on your left, and babysitting is also available in the back, so we recommend that young kids go to the babysitting so everyone can have at least another distraction. So the event is also being streamed live, so the link will be shared later on as well, and it's also on the Facebook page for all the Islam Center.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. This is actually a topic that I've become more and more passionate about, and the reason for that is I'll actually demonstrate the reason for that by telling you a data point that I heard, and it just blew my mind, right? So one of the names that I'm going to recommend that you go and read more from his work is a parenting expert named Dr. Gabor Mate. And Gabor Mate is actually, he's an expert in trauma as well as parenting as well as addiction. And one of the things that he said that blew my mind was this. He said that they looked at soldiers. So they looked at soldiers who had experienced trauma in war. And they wanted to understand what was the difference between the soldiers who came out of war with severe PTSD versus the soldiers who did not. And what they found was that the soldiers, all of them had experienced the same trauma, right, in war. But the ones who had healthy childhoods actually did not come out with the level of PTSD that those who did not have healthy childhoods did. Now let me just repeat that, because this is very profound. The children, the people who had experienced unhealthy childhoods, meaning that they grew up in homes where there was abuse, or there was trauma, or there was unhealthy parenting at whatever level, that those children were the ones who, when they experienced trauma later on in life, in this case it was war, those were the children who, when they experienced that trauma, actually ended up with the PTSD. Whereas the children who had healthy homes and grew up in healthy homes, even though they experienced this same trauma of war, they did not have PTSD. Now, what does that tell us? And by the way, they also found this with Holocaust survivors. That even among Holocaust survivors, the ones who were able to come out of that and continue to sort of function, versus those who had severe PTSD, it was also the difference between those who had healthy childhoods and those who did not. So why I mention this is that for the last decade and a half, I have personally been very interested in studying the concepts of healing and resilience and psychology as it relates to Islam. And a lot of that work has been about and around trauma healing, about getting through hardships, about what to do after the storm, what to do after and how to heal from trauma. But more recently, I've become more interested in prevention being better than cure. Because the truth is, and I heard this quote and I think it's very relevant, the truth is, one person goes, why isn't it that we spend the second half of our life healing from the first half of our life? We spend the entire second half of our life healing from the first half. And I wonder if maybe if we could collectively work to make the first half of our children's lives healthier, there would be less to have to heal from. And so that's really what's become a very, a focus for me recently, is about parenting, about tarbiyah, about how can we raise human beings in such a way where they are healthy. And that doesn't mean they're not going to experience pain. And it doesn't mean they're not going to experience trials. But it is a way to raise a human being so that they have the best chance at resilience through their trials and through their pain. Because, as I mentioned from this study, two people who experienced the same trauma, whether that was war or Holocaust, that extreme, the difference in how they responded depended on their childhood. It depended on what happened in the early years of their life. And so when we are speaking to parents, we are speaking to very important people, because parents become the ones who set that foundation of either resilience or its opposite, fragility. So what I want to do, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, I want and I ask you to go and do your own research, to go and grow yourself, because the absolute best thing that we can do as parents for our children is to heal ourselves. Because many of us do not realize that we carry generational trauma. And when I say generational trauma, you might be like, well, I mean, that's just how my parents raised us. Or we think that it's normal. Sometimes we think it's just tough love. You know that phrase, tough love, makes no sense. And I'll explain to you why it doesn't make sense. Two examples from the Quran, okay? The first example, Musa alayhi salam was faced with who? Anyone? Who was Musa facing? Fir'aun. Can someone give me a little bit of context of who Fir'aun was? Fir'aun was a man who killed babies as a policy. Fir'aun was a man who crucified people. Fir'aun was a man who stood up and said, Ana rabbukum al-a'la. I am your Lord Most High. That's who Fir'aun is. So everybody with me about who Fir'aun is, how terrible he is. He is one of the worst tyrants to walk the earth. Everyone got that? Let that just sink in for a second. Now, holding on to that information, I want to give you this ayah in the Quran, where Musa alayhi salam is being told by God, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to face Pharaoh, to approach Pharaoh, and to speak to him layyin. The word layyin means with gentleness. Now I want you to think about how wild that is. Given the fact of who Pharaoh is, and what Pharaoh has done, and yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding Musa alayhi salam to approach him with gentleness, to speak to him with gentle words. Now I want you to examine that, and now I want you to compare it to how we speak to our children. And I think that this is important because our children are not Pharaoh. It's like, right? Can we agree? Okay, alhamdulillah. No matter how frustrated we are with our children, no matter how many times we told them to clean up or to, put on their shoes or to listen or to not do this or not do that, but they're not Pharaoh. Are we agreed? And yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding his prophet to speak gentle words to Pharaoh. So what about our children? If we're meant to speak, if the prophet is meant to speak gently to Pharaoh, how do you think we should speak to someone like a child who we gave birth to? And not only did we give birth to them, but we are responsible for them. All right? So I want to first begin by unlearning and undoing some of I'll call it what it is, generational trauma. Because a lot of what we know about parenting, you didn't learn it in a book. You did not learn it through research. You did not go and do some study. You did not go and get a degree. You basically are doing what your parents did. Okay? And a lot of times, our parents did not do it right. And you might be, but I turned out all right. There's a lot I can say to that. I'm not saying you're not all right. But I can tell you this, there is a lot of issues. There are a lot of issues that we struggle with that we might not even think there's something abnormal. Because the problem is this, let me tell you another concept. The human being, and in specific, the nervous system, will prefer a familiar hell to an unfamiliar heaven. I'll repeat that. Human beings, and in specific the nervous system, prefers a familiar hell to an unfamiliar heaven. Now, would we ever say that hell is a healthy place? No. But the human being will prefer even a hell that is familiar over a heaven that is unfamiliar. And so what happens sometimes is we do what's familiar. Not only do we do what's familiar, we gravitate towards what's familiar. So how does that play out? Well, people who grow up in abusive homes, for example, people who grow up in abusive homes grow up as adults to either become abusers or marry abusers. When you grow up in an abusive home, you either become an abuser or you marry an abuser. Why? Because people prefer a familiar hell to an unfamiliar heaven. So, why do we have to break this cycle? The reason we need to break this cycle is that we pass it on to our children. Again, the people who grow up, so here's the point that I want to make clear. So if anyone is live, please mute yourself because I can hear my echo. So if you're on Zoom live, please mute yourself so I don't have to hear myself. Okay, alhamdulillah, thank you. Not yet. I don't know who I'm hearing. Any idea? Okay, alhamdulillah, great. It happens to the best of us. So here's what happens. Here's what happens. I want you all to imagine something. I want you to imagine that an abusive home is like a house that's on fire. Okay, everyone with me? Can everyone imagine what that would look like if your house was on fire? Can everyone imagine what you would do if your house was on fire? Well, of course you would go back to sleep because you have so much sabr, right? Right? You would say, no, this fire is from the qadr of Allah. This fire is a test from Allah. So I'm going to do nothing about it. I'm going to go back to sleep, or I'm going to watch the fire and do nothing because I have so much sabr. That's what you're going to do, right? Thank you. No. And yet, this is exactly what we're taught to do. Many of us are taught culturally, and again, it's a generational trauma, that when your house is on fire, you should have sabr and do nothing. And the definition of sabr that is taught is to swallow poison and keep a smile on your face. And this is not sabr, because you and I both know that if the house is on fire, you are not going to stand passively. You are going to take action to protect your house, and you're going to take action to protect your children, am I right? You're going to call the fire department. You're going to get a fire extinguisher. You're going to take action. And you're going to do everything in your power to save that house and to save the people inside that house. But you will not stand passively in a burning house. And this is one of those things that we have to unlearn. Because we have too many generations of watching this happen. And I will tell you this, anytime I meet a woman And she confides in me that she's in fact in an abusive home, and in fact her house is on fire, and yet she is passive in the sense that she is not taking action, or she doesn't know how to take action, or she doesn't know where to turn, or she's not ready to take action. Most of the time, that woman watched her mother do the same thing. This is modeled behavior. Anytime you are standing in a burning house and continuing to live in a burning house, you are sending a message to your children. Number one, this is normal. This is normal. And it will become their normal. And they will then gravitate to people who will also make their house burn. This is unfortunately the cycle of generational trauma. And so whenever we are in a situation that is abusive, for example, and I'm beginning with the extreme here, because I want to talk about parenting, but I want to begin with the extreme, because this is the most obvious. Because what people are going to say is this. They're going to say, stay in that burning house, and stay in that burning house, and keep your children in that burning house for the sake of your children. Did everyone catch that? Keep your children in the burning house for the sake of your children. And you understand why that makes no sense, but that is exactly the rationale, isn't it? So, step one when your house is on fire is you take action to stop the fire. Everyone with me? This isn't rocket science, right? What does that mean when it's abuse or a very unhealthy dynamic in the home? What does that mean? It means trying to get help. It means getting counseling. It means getting mediators. It means getting people involved. It means not continuing to drink the poison and smiling while you're doing it. It means doing something in order to try to stop the fire. Just like you would do if in fact your house was on fire. So you try to save the home first. But what happens if the fire continues? You tried counseling, you tried getting people involved, you tried intervention, you tried mediation, you tried getting family, and the fire continues. What then? Anyone? Again, not rocket science. What do? Run, don't walk out of the burning house. Make sense? I swear I'm not saying anything that's wild or radical. It's really very simple. And the fact that we do not do this and that we do not teach this is not because of Islam. It is because of toxic, backwards culture and generational trauma. So the first thing and the best thing that you can do as a parent is to heal yourself and to break the cycle. So number one, if your house is on fire, that's number one. Before we talk about healing and parenting, let's just talk about you can't be in a burning house, okay? So step one is make sure your house isn't on fire. And if it is, do something to stop it. And if it doesn't stop, run, don't walk. Simple enough? Everyone with me? All right. Now, when you do that, when you remove children from a burning house, you break a very, very toxic cycle. Because as I mentioned, when people grow up in burning homes, they live with scars for the rest of their lives. And number two, they either become abusers or they marry abusers. Why? Because it's a familiar hell. And that's what they're comfortable with. Make sense? It becomes the normal way to treat a person. It becomes a normal household because that's what you got used to. And you have to ask yourself this. Is that what you want for your daughter? And is that what you want for your son? The other question you have to ask yourself is Make sure that the person you marry or stay married to is who you want your son to become. Because guess what? Boys become their fathers. Now I say boys become their fathers with very little exception, and I'd very like to be proven wrong. So I challenge you, and I always challenge my audiences all over the world to prove me wrong on this point. That unless there is intervention, and when I say intervention, I mean to remove the son from that environment, or there is very serious therapy. And even then, it is very difficult. It is an uphill battle because the fitra is designed that boys become their fathers. Why? Because as children, we model what we see. And this is just the divine design. We model what we see. Where is a boy going to learn what it means to be a man? From his father. Where is a boy going to learn what it means to treat a woman? Where is a boy going to learn how to treat a woman? How to look at a woman? How to respect a woman? It's going to be from his father. Because that is the male role model. And so, keep in mind that you are always modeling for your children. Similarly, mothers, you are also modeling for your daughters. You are modeling what it means to be a woman. And if you spend your life drinking the poison and staying quiet about it, you are teaching your daughter to do the same thing. You're teaching your daughter that that's what it means to be a good woman. It means swallow the poison, swallow the poison, swallow the poison, and keep smiling. All right. Now, I'm going to move on to a little bit more technical psychology stuff. So, inshallah, if we could have quiet. Mashallah, people have a lot to say, especially when they're 2 years old. All right. Bismillah. Okay. So, there are different styles of parenting. Okay, I'm just going to talk about 3 styles of parenting, and then I'm going to explain some misunderstandings around these types of parenting, okay? The first style of parenting that a lot of us maybe grew up with and we're used to is called authoritative parenting. Authoritarian or authoritative parenting is very much punishment focused. It's more harsh. It's about using punishment type consequences to get the behavior that you want, okay? This is the type of parenting that basically thinks that everything's going to spoil the child. You know, you got to be harsh, otherwise you're going to spoil the child. Okay, then you have another type of parenting, which is the opposite. So I'm going to do 2 extremes here, okay? The opposite, which is called permissive parenting. Now, permissive parenting is actual spoiling of the child, which means there are no boundaries. So this is where, whatever the child wants, and you're not really creating a safe space for the child because you haven't put any boundaries. And children need boundaries. Then there is a third type of parenting, and this is the type of parenting that I want to advocate for. And that type of parenting is sometimes called positive parenting or gentle parenting. These 2 are slight, have very slight differences, but generally the umbrella of positive parenting. Now, what is the difference between these 3 types? As I mentioned, authoritative parenting is very much about, I'm the parent, I'm in control, and the authoritative parent is very focused on control, very focused on the child being obedient. Now, I want to just mention something on the side here, which is you have to be a little bit careful about raising obedient children that are blindly obedient. Let me explain why. I know culturally that's considered a good child, right? Right? It's like, سمعنا وأطعنا. We hear and we obey. You say, the parent says jump, the child says how high. And the idea is that that's a good child, right? And that's the goal. The goal is to have a child who is blindly obedient to the parent, or blindly obedient to authority. And I want to add that because it's going to be important. Now, we might think that that's what the goal is and that's a good child, but I want to warn you that that can be very dangerous. And let me explain why. If a child grows up to be blindly obedient to authority, they also become very easy to abuse. They become very easy to abuse. And if they are abused, they're very easy to stay quiet. Because all the authority has to say is, shh, and the child, because the child has learned anything that an authority figure says, we hear and we obey blindly, blind obedience. And so it is very, very dangerous, and we have it, unfortunately, in a lot of our cultures. And I would say especially Asian cultures, where there's this idea that a good child is an obedient child who is blindly obedient to parents. Now, we obviously know in Islam that we're supposed to have birr, right? Birr al-walidain. Now, I want to talk about this because birr doesn't mean blind obedience. Birr is kindness to parents, being good to parents. Birr does not mean blind obedience. And so it is very important that we respect parents. We are kind to parents. In fact, Allah says, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. We're supposed to show ihsan to our parents. But if we have blind obedience to a parent, what happens when the parent wants you to do something that goes against what Allah wants you to do? This is a very real situation. Because imagine you grew up being completely obedient to what your parents want, and now your parents are saying, no, don't wear hijab. Because if you wear hijab, you're not going to get married. Because how are they going to see your hair? And they only marry you for your hair, right? So the idea is, this is just an example. But what happens when the parent now wants you to do something that is against Allah and His Messenger? That's one example. But beyond that is the fact that if you do not teach your child to be able to stand up for themselves when necessary, unfortunately, they become very easy to take advantage of. So as parents, the focus on control isn't the right focus. The focus should be on, this child is my amana, and raising this child in the best way, that's my focus. But the focus shouldn't be, I'm in charge, and I'm in control. Because sometimes what that actually is generational trauma. It's the fact that that's how you were treated when you were a child. And a lot of it is triggering. Let me move to the permissive, and then I'll inshallah get back to that concept. Now, the opposite extreme is the permissive parent. This is the parent, again, who we would say is spoiling the child without boundaries. So I'll give you an example to kind of explain what these might look like. Imagine a child is demanding a cookie before dinner. Sounds, right, pretty realistic. Or candy, right? So this child is like, I want a cookie now, and they haven't eaten dinner. The authoritative parent might punish the child. Because the authoritative parent might start by saying, no. Okay, that's a boundary. No. But now the child, what's the child going to do if they're 2 years old, or 3 years old, or 4 years old, or just a child? If they want a cookie and you say no, what are they going to do? Anyone? They're going to throw a temper tantrum. They're going to cry. They're going to scream. Can I tell you something? That is a normal reaction. Do you know why? Because the child doesn't have a fully developed frontal cortex. See this right here? This prefrontal cortex doesn't get developed until you're like 25 or 30 years old, and a little bit later in boys. So the idea is that you're dealing with a human being who actually does not have a fully developed brain. And part of the job of the prefrontal cortex is self-control. It's emotional regulation. It's you couldn't get what you wanted, but you could still control yourself. You didn't throw a temper tantrum. Unfortunately, we have a lot of adults who don't have that much emotional regulation either. But they don't have an excuse because they're over 25. But the child literally doesn't have the brain capacity to control themselves completely. So emotional regulation is still being developed. So when you tell that child no, you're holding a boundary. But that child is now going to scream or throw a temper tantrum. Now, authoritative parent is going to punish the child at this point. Is going to punish the child for being angry. When in fact, the anger is completely natural. And the way that a 2-year-old or 3-year-old knows how to deal with their anger is to throw a temper tantrum. Now, what does the permissive parent do in that situation? The permissive parent says, sure, you can have a cookie. Even though they haven't had dinner and it wouldn't be good for them to have a cookie at that point. What does the positive parenting or the gentle parenting, what would they do in that situation? Well, what they would do is hold the boundary, which is no, unfortunately you cannot have a cookie because it would be harmful for you. And as a parent, it's your job to protect your child, right? It's your job to hold boundaries, and that's part of protecting your child. So you would hold the boundary, but alongside holding the boundary, there is compassion and empathy. I know you're disappointed that you couldn't have a cookie, but unfortunately, you still can't have a cookie. But it's empathizing with the child rather than punishing the child for their emotions. So this is the different philosophy, is that positive parenting is about teaching the child to emotionally regulate. And the way to emotionally regulate is to actually process the emotion. Do you know that you cannot regulate an emotion that you don't allow yourself to feel? You cannot process an emotion that you don't allow yourself to feel. And so what we do as harsh parents is we're basically teaching our children to suppress their emotions so that they don't get in trouble. And by the way, this becomes a lifelong habit. So I saw this little video where it was like this mother saying to the child, the child is asking for a cookie, and the mother says, no, you can't have a cookie. You have to eat dinner. And the child is really upset, right? And then the mother says, go to your room. Go to your room. And she's like, okay, but how do I deal with my anger? And she's like, by going to your room and stuffing it down, and for the rest of your life, stuffing your anger down, and you better come out happy. And this is a joke, obviously. But the point is made, which is, what we end up doing is teaching our children to just stuff their emotions rather than regulate them. Rather than learn to manage them, we teach them to suppress them so that they can be acceptable to the people around them, and so that they can be liked, and so that they can be a people pleaser. And this is also where people-pleasing can come from. This idea that what I feel is unacceptable, and therefore I need to suppress what I feel in order for people to like me. And then you wonder why we grow up, and these people will grow up and they don't know how to manage their emotions. They actually don't, half the time they don't even know what they're feeling because they're so used to suppressing. So the idea here is that a lot of people confuse positive parenting with permissive parenting, right? They'll be like, well, if you don't punish them, they're going to be spoiled. That's the idea. But positive parenting is different than permissive parenting because positive parenting holds boundaries. Positive parenting, remember, they didn't give the cookie, right? They still held the boundary, but they also did it with compassion and empathy. So I understand that you're angry right now because you couldn't have the cookie, but I cannot give you the cookie because it's not going to be good for you. Now here's how you deal with your anger. Rather than punishing them for their emotions. Have a timeout because they're angry. Well, the reality is there is no other possibility when you tell a 2-year-old that they can't have a cookie, they're going to be angry because that's just a normal emotion that they have not yet learned how to regulate. So they're going to have outbursts, but you have to help them regulate. For example, there are certain behaviors you teach them that this is not the way we behave. Say they're angry and they go punch their brother. That's not okay. It doesn't mean you're permissive. It doesn't mean that everything is okay. What it means is that you hold boundaries, but you do so with compassion and empathy. And that is how you teach children how to regulate their emotions. Now fast forward. I'm going to fast forward now, okay? Studies out of Harvard and other universities found that people who were positive parented end up being healthier in their mental health, more successful in their careers and their lives, and more successful in their relationships. So this isn't just theoretical. This is extremely important because it builds healthy adults. Okay? Finally, I want to just add a little bit about attachment styles. So basically, there are 2 types of attachment styles. There is something called a secure attachment, and there's something called an insecure attachment. So a child, and this is, by the way, in any relationship. So you can have an insecure attachment in your marriage. You can have a secure attachment in your marriage. And you can have a secure attachment to the parent, between a parent and a child, or you can have an insecure attachment. And what's very interesting is the type of attachment that you have with your parent it affects the type of attachments you have in your marriage. So individuals who had a secure attachment to their caregiver tend to grow up and get married to other people with secure attachments, and their marriages are healthier. And people who had insecure attachments to their caregiver end up having insecure attachments in their future relationships. How do you build a secure attachment with your child? Through this type of positive parenting. The whole idea of positive parenting is to build a secure attachment with the child. A secure attachment is essentially to be a safe space for your child. That your child is not just surviving you. Because a lot of people are like, but they're so well behaved. Well, they might be so well behaved, but they may not have a healthy attachment to you, and they may not be healthy mentally either. They might be wonderfully behaved, but inside they're not healthy. Inside they may have anxiety. Inside they may have an anxious attachment or an avoidant attachment. And so it's very important that we're not just looking at obedient children. Children aren't robots. Children are human beings. So it's very important that we understand that to have a secure attachment, you have to be a safe space for your child. And how do you do that? Well, it starts actually when the child is a baby. And there's a lot of research about something called this is the attachment parenting, which is basically, you know, this idea that you're going to spoil the child if you carry the child too much, or you're going to spoil the child if you pick up the child right when they cry. By the way, psychology has found that that's all absolute toxic garbage. That's absolutely wrong. That what happens when you ignore your child's cries, from the time they're young, you are teaching them that the world is an unsafe place. You're teaching them that. You're wiring it into their nervous system. You're telling them that this world that you just came into, you used to be in the womb and you were all comfortable and safe, and now this world that you just came into by no choice of your own, it's not safe for you. Because every time you have a need, it's going to be ignored. There's no one who's going to come to you. So you're teaching that child something very dangerous, which is that the world is unsafe and that you're unsafe as a parent. So what that child develops is basically generalized anxiety. And not just generalized anxiety, but a nervous system that is totally dysregulated. Why does our nervous system become dysregulated? When we feel unsafe. It all goes back to safety. It all goes back to safety. And so the goal of attachment parenting and positive, gentle parenting is to be a place of safety for your child. And when you become a place of safety for your child, you build a secure attachment. And that makes your child have the best chance of success for the rest of their lives. In their life, in their career, and in their relationships. The problem with insecure attachments, and I'll just quickly talk about there's 3 types of insecure attachments. One is called an anxious attachment. An anxiously attached child is a child who is afraid of abandonment. So they fear abandonment. And this might happen because a parent was negligent, or a parent was absent, or a parent was abusive, a parent was narcissistic, and they were, they were very hot or cold, right? They had like, this is going to be very familiar, but basically a parent who, as long as you do what I say, I'll love you. But the moment you don't do what I say, I will withhold love. I will give you the cold shoulder. I will give you the silent treatment. This is very, very toxic. Because what you're doing is you're teaching your child that, number one, there is no safe place. You are not a safe space for them. And you're teaching your child that love from a parent is conditional. And this is supposed to be the unconditional love. There really is no other unconditional love out there. Like a spouse, that's not unconditional. Like, if you wrong the spouse, they're not going to unconditionally love you. A parent, like, obviously after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and obviously with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are conditions, even with in terms of Allah's pleasure. So when we talk about this conditional, as long as it's my way, I'll be happy with you. And sometimes it's a little bit of a trauma bond. If you study narcissism, it's interesting. By the way, there are a lot of narcissistic parents. There's a lot of narcissistic parents. I advise you to read about that. But basically, the parent will be praising the child to the moon and back, so long as they do what they want, the way they want it. But as soon as they do something different or have a different opinion, they become completely cut off. So this can create an anxious attachment because there's always that fear of abandonment, that fear that I'm going to lose my parent or I'm going to lose that person. If I don't, people please. And this is where people pleasing comes. Oftentimes, people pleasers had very explosive or very unpredictable, harsh parents. Like, they had to basically walk on eggshells with the parent. And so they grow up to learn this is a trauma response to be people pleasers. Basically do anything to please other people, even if it hurts you, even at your expense. So this is something that was learned through trauma. Another type of insecure attachment is called an avoidant attachment. Avoidant attachments can happen when you have a smothering parent, like a parent who's very controlling and very overbearing. And that avoidant attachment is basically trying to keep a distance with other people and have difficulty with intimacy and difficulty with closeness. Okay? And then disorganized is kind of goes between these two, avoidant and anxious. They did this study with children to test what type of attachment they had. It's called like the strange situation example or like experiment. So what they do is they look at the reaction of the child when the parent comes to pick them up, say from preschool or daycare or school. So there's basically 3 types of reactions. One is that the child is really happy to see the parent, and the child goes and hugs the parent, and the child is, excited and happy with the parent. That's a sign of a secure attachment. The second is the child is very angry with the parent when they come to pick them up. And they're maybe hit the parent, they're angry at the parent, and this is maybe a sign of an anxious attachment. There is something that the child doesn't feel safe and is angry at the parent for abandoning them. So there's an abandonment, fear of abandonment. And the third is the child basically hides from the parent. Like maybe doesn't want to go with the parent or hides from the parent or hides behind the teacher. And again, this isn't black and white. But these in this study became indications of potential types of attachment styles, attachments that have between the child and the parent. Now, are these set in stone? Absolutely not. These are things that can be healed and things that can be fixed. These can be mended and changed. So it isn't like. It isn't permanent, especially when the child is young. Even when the child is an adult, there can be mending to these ruptures. Okay? I want to, inshallah, I think, what time is Isha?
9:45.
Huh? 9:45. Okay, so what I want to do now is pause and have a chance for some questions, inshallah. Yes?
What if someone is unaware or in denial of their parenting style? How do you bring them into that awareness? Because I think that's a big struggle for most of our generations, because we've been so set in that familiarity that we don't realize that there's a better way.
Yeah. So the question is, what happens if someone's totally unaware of their parenting style? Maybe it's an unhealthy parenting style. How do you get them to be aware? My main focus is changing ourselves first and foremost, focusing on ourselves. But the answer is education, really. It's I would say 2 things. Okay, number 1 is education, and number 2 is inner work, healing, doing the work, because so many of us are a product of our own upbringing, and we have triggers that need healing, and we have generational trauma that needs healing. So one part of it is education, but another part is healing. And one of the things that that parenting experts say is basically the most important thing as a parent to be a healthy parent. You want to know what it is? It's self-regulation. It's It's self-regulation. It's making sure that your dysregulated 3-year-old doesn't pull you into the storm with them. You know what I mean? That you stay regulated. That you stay in your prefrontal cortex. You make sure, because yours is fully developed. And that's not easy. That's not easy, especially because our children push our buttons. And sometimes our children, and this is where healing comes in, sometimes we have a wound that's very old. We have a wound from our own childhood, and the child is coming and pressing it. The child is pushing it. Maybe we never felt like we were important. Maybe we felt ignored. So when your child's ignoring you, it's gonna push that button. And you might react extra, not because of what's actually happening, but because of what it's triggering from your own wounds of never feeling like you were heard or listened to. So it's also important that we heal ourselves. So education is one part of it, but the inner work and the healing is another very important part of that. Now, I'm assuming your question is about like the other parent, maybe, or another person other than ourselves. Always what I want to remind people is that we can't change another person. We can only change ourselves. We can advise, we can try to share in education, but we cannot change another person. Yes, you had your hand.
So you spoke a lot about like trauma, generational trauma, and healing. And my question is, I know it's very important to heal ourselves, but what do we do when the situation is continuous? For example, generational trauma doesn't stop at one point. For example, like I'm from Gaza now, and I'm supposed to be taking care of like 4 kids. And I feel I'm under stress all the time, I'm anxious all the time. And there are things that I like, you know, it's not an abusive relationship. We have a very big house. I am very educated. But there are things that, you know, it's just that the feeling of being tense all the time, and it's absolutely reflected on the kids. You try your best to like try to avoid that, but like you really don't know.
You don't
because
know.
it's like counseling, it's continuous. It's not like it's, so this is like, I don't know if you get my question.
I get your question, absolutely get your question, and it's such a deep question. So I'll repeat your question for the people online. Her question is, what do you do when the stressor, the cause of the trauma is ongoing? And for example, this sister is from Gaza, and she's raising 4 children with a obviously dysregulated nervous system. She's saying she's always feeling anxious, and it's because it's ongoing trauma. How do you deal with that? That's a very good question. What I would say is, there is one part of this general answer, which is to try, obviously, as much as you can to remove yourself from trauma or traumatic environments. That's the optimal, obviously. If, for example, it's an abusive home, if, for example, it's an unhealthy environment, to try to remove yourself from that. That's the ideal. But sometimes it's maybe things that you cannot remove yourself from, as the example you gave. And for that, what I would say is self-care. And when I say self-care, it goes back to emotional regulation and not just nervous. So basically, regulating your nervous system is now what doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, everyone has basically found that that is the key to health. That is the key to wellness. It's regulating the nervous system. So a dysregulated nervous system is basically what causes chronic illness, mental health issues, and all the havoc that can happen inside of us. So the key is to regulate the nervous system. How do you do that when there's stress all the time? Different levels of stress. Obviously what you're describing is extreme stress. But everyone has different levels of stress, chronic stress perhaps. And so what I would say for that is having a system of daily of daily regulation, of daily self-care. And what I mean by that is not like, just going and getting a manicure. That's not what I mean. Actual self-care and actual emotional regulation is things like going for a walk, journaling, breathing, certain breathing exercises, taking a hot shower, like maybe a cold shower. These are the types of things that you have to do daily to regulate the nervous system, okay, to try to calm the nervous system down. Because a dysregulated nervous system is not going to allow you to even be in your prefrontal cortex. In fact, there's something called amygdala hijacking, which means that your fear center, called the amygdala, takes over the prefrontal cortex. So when you're in a panic state, when you're in a perpetual state of feeling unsafe, or panic, or heightened fight or flight response, your frontal lobe, your prefrontal cortex is offline. You actually cannot make good decisions. You cannot think rationally. You cannot problem solve. All of that happens in your prefrontal cortex. And so when you are triggered in your fight or flight, and you feel threatened, and you feel that panic state, regulation is to try to calm the nervous system so that the prefrontal cortex can come back online, and the amygdala can calm down. And that's really just, you find what works for you, but it's something that you have to invest in every day. And when you do that, then you'll be able to be more present for your children, as you mentioned, and to try to help, because they absolutely, they're stressed, right? So there was this water, and then you have like a glass of, just like an empty glass. And she's saying that throughout the day, you're gonna have emotions and stress, right? So those emotions are going into your body, because that's where you store emotion, right, in your body. So you're pouring the emotion into your body, and if you're not regulating, so say, you started pouring, and you realize that your cup is half full, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna have to do something to regulate. So what you do is you go and you take a walk. You call a friend. That's actually one of the ways women especially regulate, because oxytocin is one of the most important chemicals for regulating the nervous system, and oxytocin is all about bonding and connection. So you call up your sister, you call up your friend, you talk to someone, just a friend. And, or you journal, or you take a walk. So what that does is it pours out the water. Now, more things happen. So more water is being poured. You realize, oh, it's getting full. You do something to regulate, you pour out the water. But now imagine that you're not paying attention to your body at all. You're not paying attention to the fact that you're getting over full, that you're getting dysregulated. You know what ends up happening? The cup gets over full. And when the cup gets over full, it overflows. And when it overflows, you lose control. See, you had control when you were emptying as you were going along. But once it gets over full, you all know what that looks like. That's the volcano. That's the panic attack. That panic attack is what happens when the body has had so much adrenaline and it hasn't regulated. And so it gets to a point where the body says, I can't take anymore. And it goes out of control. It's a dysregulated nervous system that has gone so long in dysregulation that it loses control. You lose control. Yes?
It seems to me that parenting is not easy.
True.
And it is a consistent struggle. Not just infrequently, but consistently. That's one comment I have. And the other comment I have is the parenting also depends on the two parents, not just one. So if one has a positive, one keep the parenting in a proper way.
I absolutely agree with you. So first thing he said, which is absolutely true, is parenting is very difficult. That's very true. And that's why obviously the Quran reminds us again and again how much our parents did for us, and parenting is hard. The second point that he made, which was very true as well, is it's very difficult when the two parents are not on the same page about parenting. You might have one positive parent and then you have one who's passive or permissive, for example. And, that can create a big problem. My advice is to actually try to get counseling, to try to do family counseling. Because family counseling, involves everyone to actually mediate these issues. So I wouldn't ignore it, because it's important. This is one of the most important jobs that you have, which is the raising of a human being. So I would definitely invest in family counseling, or marital counseling for that. And maybe take classes together. Maybe do some, do educate yourselves together, and we can always learn and we can always grow. The Prophet ﷺ said, seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. So that's something that we should always do, and we can do that together as spouses. In terms of healing, also from trauma, past trauma, and also, like you were saying, the chronic trauma, there are different therapy methodologies. But I do advise getting therapy. I know you're talking specifically about like when it's chronic, but still there's a lot of trauma to process from the past as well. And so therapy is very effective. Different types of therapy works for different people. EMDR is a type of therapy that helps a lot with trauma. But there's other types of therapy, but I would definitely go that route, whether it has to do with counseling, family counseling, or trauma therapy. I can take, inshallah, one last question before I should. Alaykum salam.
Sister Yasmin, I realize that this session is very important, and we do not have time to touch on every basic issue concerning parenting. But something I wanted to sit with you, and I'm sure we will cover this, or we can have another one, is the post-mortem stage.
The what?
Before the mother is pregnant, she needs to begin to organize herself and what she should do, things that she should do. And also, another important thing is that when a woman is pregnant, sometimes the parents do not expect to have a child. And so the mother becomes very frustrated. And because of her stress, they are not accept that, it's so overwhelmed that it affects the child. So they usually say the child is panicking, or, sometimes fathers put the child in the car and drive to keep the child quiet, and the child continuously crying. The mothers and fathers have to be very careful, because when the child is in the womb, the parents are supposed to welcome that child, to speak about, I love you, whatever. But some of them will say, I hate this thing, I don't know, I'm not pregnant, I'm 40 years of age, I did not expect this. And it affects the child, and it doesn't matter actually what you do or who takes the child. That child is coming into the world very unhappy because it was neglected in the first stage. Yeah. A child never comes into this world knowing anything. So there is a lot of underlying, and it takes a lot more, but time is not right. And we have to pray, but there's a lot to pray concerning all child.
No, you're absolutely right, and a lot of it has to do with before pregnancy, during pregnancy, and also social support. Having that postpartum is very important. We talk about postpartum depression. One of the most important, ways to help with postpartum or prevent postpartum depression is social support. So you're absolutely right. That's a very big part of it. Inshallah, we'll pause here. For those people who want a copy of the book, I have 3 books. I've brought limited copies of each of them. One is called Reclaim Your Heart. This is a book a lot about Islamic spirituality and how we can connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and learn to be in this life without having unhealthy attachments to this life. The other book is called Love and Happiness, and this is a collection of quotes. And then my recent book is called Healing the Emptiness. And Healing the Emptiness is a lot about healing from trauma and also Islamic psychology. So inshallah, if you're interested after the salah, I have some copies. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله استوى الله سوف نسير تمام الصلاة الله أكبر الله
الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين إن الذين كفروا لن تغني عنهم أموالهم ولا أولادهم من الله شيئا وأولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون مثل ما ينفقون في هذه الحياة الدنيا كمثل ريح فيها صر أصابت حرث قوم ظلموا أنفسهم فأهلكته وما ظلمناهم ولكن كانوا أنفسهم يظلمون يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا بطانة من دونكم لا يالونكم خبالا ودوا ما عنتم قد بدت البغضاء من أفواههم وما تخفي صدورهم أكبر قد بينا لكم الآيات إن كنتم تعقلون وإذا لقوكم قالوا آمنا وإذا خلوا عضوا عليكم الأنامل من الغيظ قل موتوا بغيظكم إن الله عليم بذات الصدور إن تمسسكم حسنة تسؤهم وإن تصبكم سيئة يفرحوا بها وإن تصبروا وتتقوا لا يضركم كيدهم شيئا إن الله بما يعملون محيط. الله سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تلهكم أموالكم ولا أولادكم عن ذكر الله ومن يفعل ذلك فأولئك هم الخاسرون. وأنفقوا مما رزقناكم من قبل أن يأتي أحدكم الموت فيقول رب لولا أخرتني إلى أجل قريب فأصدق وأكن من الصالحين ولن يؤخر الله نفسا إذا جاء أجلها والله خبير بما تعملون. الله سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Just wanted to say on behalf of everyone here, our thanks to Sister Yasmin. It was a beautiful talk, mashallah, and I'm sure there's a lot of things that we can take back and start applying in our lives. As mentioned earlier, she will be signing her books at the table at the back. So please take this opportunity to take one of the books, so you can take home, go home and read them as well. And there are also some refreshments. I see some of them are still over there, so please help yourself after the salah. So.